So I started when I was a graduate student in '66, and the last cruise I went on was in 1991. So yeah, there's a romanticism about going to sea, as you well know, and so I'm not the rhyme of the ancient mariner, but there's other things, and so I don't unless you've been out there um, for an extended period, I don't think you really can appreciate what it's like, because the idea of the Sargasso Sea, where it's a flat, calm, machine steel surface, okay, that does exist. And one of the cruises we went on, we were the first 3 or 4 days. That's how it was, and then we got off Cape Hatteras, where the perfect storm. That's the book about the perfect storm, and that's what we got. And Kent Fanning and I were on the ship, and within a period of less than 1 hour, the wind went from essentially flat to 55 knots. And I had a whole series of sampling bottles in the water that were been deployed off it's a 180-foot, 840-ton vessel. And the trick was at a certain wind speed, they cannot control the vessel anymore. The wind speed is so high, it's pushing the vessel away from the bottle. And so the squawk box, which is in the hydro lab that we were working in, the captain calls down and says, "Betzer, get the bottles out of the water now." And I said, "Yes, sir." So we pull all our bottles out, no samples, because they hadn't had a chance to get them down to depth. And we got the bottles back in the lab and secured, and by then the wind was about 80 knots. And by the time about 7 or 8 in the evening, it was 90 knots. And the people, it was so high and the waves were so high that the officers and the stand people were trapped on the bridge because they had external exits. And so they stayed there for almost 24 hours. They were trapped on the bridge. The ship was being hit by waves that would send shudders through the entire thing. And in the galley where you have the cooks set up and they've got these slotted pieces of steel to hold pots, the ship vibrated so substantially that it threw those things onto the floor, off. And you actually have to physically, you have to be strong to get them, okay? And they're running around making a horrible racket, and with all the pots and pans flying all over the place. And in fact, in our bunks, it was so violent that we had to take our life jackets, prop up the mattress, put the life jackets under it, so you were basically sleeping in a U. Okay? Otherwise, you'd have been thrown out of. And I was in an upper bunk. There's no way I want to go down, 2 stories. And anyway, that's the ocean at its worst. But you have to be prepared to live with it. It wasn't clear for a while that we were going to survive, that the vessel could handle it, because it was being knocked so violently. And something, what was the, oh yeah, I found out later from the captain that they had twin 600 horsepower diesels in this thing. Okay, and they had it up to 3/4 power forward, and they were losing ground. The wind was so severe, even though they were pointed straight into it, it was pushing the ship back nautical mile an hour. Okay, anyway, that's when you think you're going to sea, you sort of figure, well, it should be great. Well, sometimes not so great. Okay, anyway. There was one more astounding thing that we had happen that I thought at sea. Okay. And one of the things we did that generated a lot of excitement was basically looking at what happened when a large cloud of Chinese dust came out of the Chinese deserts and hit the Pacific Ocean. So we were lucky enough to be out there when a huge cloud of dust came out, and we were on a ship about 300 nautical miles north of Hilo. But it turns out right in the path when this thing was coming, the cloud wave, they were tracing it via satellite, and they were telling us when it was coming. And so we had these samplers, and we could put the samplers in the water and collect the dust and see what happened to the water column after this iron-rich dust hit, which stimulates all these little primary producers, a little microplankton. But another thing happened while we had just gotten in from that cruise, and the next cruise went out to the same area, and they had radioactive counters on board because they were interested, because the dust has a lot of radon, gives a radium, and so it's giving off radon. So you actually, when you collect the dust, you can see how much radioactivity is associated with the dust. And all of a sudden, they had a lot of trouble with their counters. All their counters went off scale. There was 100% dead time, meaning that the rate of counting was so great, the counter couldn't even keep track of it. All of their counters went off scale. And this has never happened. So hey, they've got all these electronic techies out there. They're tearing the system apart, and they're getting madder than hell because they can't figure out what's wrong. So they finally give up and say the counters are all broken. And they called the University of Rhode Island's Nuclear Center to say, hey, you know, the stuff you gave us, we've done everything and they don't work. The counters they're going off scale. And the answer was, there are unconfirmed reports of a Soviet reactor going down from Sweden. You may actually have been getting dust from Chernobyl. And indeed it was. So the cesium and iodine isotopes, iodine-131 and the cesium-137, had hit. So the cloud from Chernobyl, and this is before anything was announced, and that's why those counters had gone off scale. 10 time zones away. No, that's 10 time zones to get to the Pacific, and another 4 or 5 to get to where the ship was. Okay?
That's a book. Wow, no kidding. Yeah, look at the face. I'm like, oh my gosh. Wait, were you at risk then?
No, we had just landed, and we had turned the boat over, the vessel. This was the Moana Wave. So we turned it over to, they were using the same equipment, except they added the nuclear counters. We weren't doing the counters. We were collecting the dust. But at the time that we were out there, it was just before Chernobyl went off. And when we were going in, Chernobyl went off. And then so it was like 2 or 3 days in port, and then they went out. And so they go out, and then by that time, this huge cloud of radioactive dust hit the North Pacific. And of course, the Soviets aren't talking, you know. You'd have to talk to Svetlana, who wrote the book about the voices from Chernobyl, to find out that the Ukrainians knew something was very wrong. So anyway, that was amazing, really amazing. And the Japanese traced it. The Japanese had an interceptor trap at like 2,000 meters, and within a couple of weeks, they had a big load of cesium and iodine in the traps. They collected it, so they could actually say how fast this stuff got jetted down pretty fast. So yeah.